A fire lookout is supposed to be the opposite of mystery. It is a dot on a ridge you can see from the valley, a box of windows that catches the sun, a place built for watching, not hiding. When you hike toward one, you usually feel that quiet comfort of having a destination that cannot move. And that's why Owen Mercer's disappearance hit people differently. Not because he was famous, not because the trail was legendary, because the whole setup felt too clean. He went up toward Ash Peak Lookout on a clear morning in late summer, during a hard, dry season when the forest seemed to crackle even when it was still. He didn't come back that night. He didn't come back the next day. 4 months later, rangers found his backpack hanging inside the tower, off the floor like someone wanted it, visible but untouched. A lookout tower is a promise of sightlines. His backpack turned it into a question mark. Owen was 34, remote job, quiet life. The kind of man who could spend a whole week inside a laptop glow and then step outside on Saturday like someone unclipping a leash. He wasn't a thrill seeker. He didn't do the look at me thing. No stunt photos on cliff edges. No reckless shortcuts for the sake of a story. He planned hikes the way careful people do. The boring way: weather check, trail conditions, backup battery, a printed map even though he had a phone. He packed extra water even when it annoyed him to carry it. There was one habit he never fixed though. He didn't like making a big deal of his routes. He would say in that casual, almost dismissive way that he was doing the loop to the lookout. He would mention the trailhead. He would mention the tower. He would not break the whole day down into timestamps and turns. He treated hiking like a private act, like something that worked only if it stayed a little unobserved. His sister was used to that. She still checked in with him. She still watched the clock. She still had that mental map of his weekends. Leave early, hike, send a photo, come home tired, eat something salty, pass out. The morning he went to Ash Peak, he did send a photo. Nothing dramatic. A trail sign. An arrow pointing up. The kind of picture you take just to mark the start. The caption was simple, almost lazy. Tower Day. Back tonight. Then the day went quiet. No other photos, no made it, no view is insane, no lost service. By late evening, his sister texted him, then called, then waited, telling herself the same soothing lies people tell in those moments. Dead zone, battery, fell asleep early, forgot. But her worry didn't float away. It sank. It had weight. Around 9, she pulled up the trail map and stared at it too long, as if staring could make something move. And the loop was long but not extreme, and the elevation gain was real, but Owen did harder hikes without drama. The weather that day had been stable, warm, dry, a little windy, not the kind of forecast that turns into headlines. She called the county line. She gave his name. She gave the trail. She gave the car description. She kept her voice steady because she didn't want to sound like a person who panics. The person on the other end asked the usual things. Then came the question that felt oddly specific. Was the lookout staffed? Was it open? Was it locked? She didn't know. She'd never thought about it. She assumed a tower was like a viewpoint. You get there, you stand, you look, you leave. It was not like that. Ash Peak was a working structure, not staffed every day but maintained, sometimes used in the worst weeks of fire season, sometimes locked up because it was too tempting for hikers to treat it like a cabin. People would leave trash, people would break things, people would scratch their names into windows. So when the ranger on call heard lookout loop, he didn't just picture a trail, he pictured a door. And doors are either open or closed. Either way, they matter. Search teams moved fast that night because the first hours are when missing hikers are often still alive, still near the trail, still reachable. A deputy drove up to the trailhead. A ranger followed. Headlights swept across the dusty lot and stopped on a silver SUV parked neatly inside the lines, like Owen had stepped out for groceries and would be right back. No smashed window, no scattered gear, no frantic note left under a wiper blade. Just a car that looked normal. The deputy checked the dash. No permits, no papers, nothing that helped. Rangers looked for the trail register, found it, flipped the pages in flashlight glow. Owen's name was there, the time, the destination, Ash Peak Lookout Loop. The next question was simple. If he went up, where did he stop going up? At first light, the teams came in properly, not just 2 vehicles at a trailhead, but a full search. Rangers, trained volunteers, dog handlers, a small group with radios and maps, and that sober discipline people develop when they've done this before. They split into the obvious zones: main trail, side paths, drainages, any shortcuts hikers sometimes attempt. The dogs worked the first mile with confidence, then the scent got messy. Not vanished, just scrambled. Lots of feet on a weekend trail, lots of overlapping tracks. The forest holding too many human stories at once. Still, there were places that pulled attention. A section of trail where the ground dropped sharply to a rocky slope. A patch where someone had slid recently, soil torn and raw. A fork that looked like a shortcut but wasn't. They checked it all. Nothing that felt like Owen. By midday, the teams reached the lookout. Ash Peak Tower sat exactly where it always sat. Impossible to miss. A tall skeleton of wood and metal, steps rising into the sky. A small cab at the top with windows that caught the sun in hard squares. From below, it looked calm. Up close, it looked weathered. The kind of weathering that tells you it has seen decades of storms and heat and smoke. The door at the top was locked. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. Because a locked door doesn't tell you who was here. It tells you only that someone decided it should be locked. That decision could have been made at any time. Rangers checked around the base, around the stairs, around the platform supports. They looked for fresh scuffs, fresh chips in paint, anything that suggested someone tried to force it. There were signs of life the way there always are. Boot marks on steps, a crushed plastic bottle someone had missed in their pack, a candy wrapper tucked behind a beam like a shameful secret. Nothing that screamed struggle. Nothing that whispered accident. The most frustrating kind of nothing. They moved outward. They swept the ridgeline. They checked down the slopes where a fall could turn fatal and quiet. They checked the ravines where a person can slide and not be seen from above. The weather stayed cruelly cooperative. Warm days, cool nights, no storms to wash clues away, no rain to soften tracks, and still no Owen. After 2 days, the search widened. More volunteers, more grid lines on maps, more radios, more careful walks through brush that snagged clothing and patience. It became one of those cases that stretches. First it feels urgent, then it feels heavy, then it feels unreal. The early energy fades. The easy theories get used up. People begin to say the same things in different words. Maybe he left the trail. Maybe he got confused. Maybe he fell. Maybe he met someone. Maybe he didn't want to be found. That last one always enters eventually, not because it's kind, because people need an explanation. And chose to vanish is the only explanation that gives the brain a sense of control. But Owen didn't look like a man who planned to erase himself. His bank account didn't move in weird ways. His phone didn't travel to another state. There was no dramatic goodbye, no sudden emptying of closets, no car packed like an escape vehicle. The simplest version remained the most likely. Something went wrong out there. The problem was, the trail didn't offer the usual places for wrongness. After a week, the official search scaled down. That did not mean people stopped looking. It meant the forest was big and resources are finite, and the hardest sentence in this job is that the chances drop with time. The seasons shifted. The heat grew sharper, then it softened. The first cold nights came, clean and bright. Leaves started to fall in the lower elevations. The high ridge stayed stubbornly green, wind scoured, watching. Owen's sister drove up twice with a group of friends. She walked sections of trail that had been searched already, because the human mind does that. It circles the last known place like it's a magnet. She stood below the tower and stared at it until her eyes hurt. She kept thinking about the door. She kept thinking about the fact that it was locked. She kept thinking about how strange it is that a place built to look outward can also hide things inside. Then the first wildfire of the season sparked 2 ridges over. Not near Ash Peak, but close enough to put everyone on alert. Smoke drifted in thin streaks. The air tasted like a campfire you couldn't locate. Rangers got pulled into firework. Trails closed. Search efforts became harder, not just emotionally, logistically. Then winter came the way it often does in those foothills. Slowly at first, then suddenly. Overnight frost, icy steppes, wind that cut. The lookout became a less attractive destination. Fewer hikers, fewer casual eyes on the trail. And when the forest quiets down, the stories get louder in people's heads. There were sightings. A hunter who swore he saw a man in a gray jacket near a creek. A couple who said a light flickered in the lookout windows at night, like someone was up there. A teenager who posted a shaky video of the tower in fog and claimed it was definitely haunted. Rangers learned to treat those reports like weather. Noise. Not worthless, but rarely the thing that solves anything. 4 months passed. That's long enough for the world to move on. Not completely, not cleanly, but enough that the case becomes a file, not a headline. Enough that the people still searching begin to feel alone in their searching. It was late winter when the tower came back into focus, not because someone found Owen on the trail, because maintenance day arrived. Lookouts are not abandoned relics. They are tools. Even when a tower isn't staffed, it gets checked. Hinges seize, steps loosen, windows crack, radio equipment needs attention, locks get replaced, the kind of slow decay that doesn't make news, but does kill people if ignored. A 2-person ranger crew was assigned to Ash Peak that day. The weather was cold, but clear. The kind of day where the sky looks scrubbed like someone washed it. Wind low, visibility sharp, good for climbing. They reached the tower with tool packs and a small case of hardware. They unlocked the bottom gate, climbed the stairs, stopped on the platform to catch their breath because everyone catches their breath on those stairs, no matter how tough they act. Then they reached the cab door. The lock was odd, not broken, not forced, odd. It looked newer than it should have been. It wasn't a dramatic difference, not something you'd notice in a photo. But if you work with these towers, you develop a sense of their normal wear. You know what the metal looks like after years. You know the pattern of rust. You know how the key turns. This lock had a cleaner face, less corrosion, different screws. It didn't match the memory of the ranger who'd been here last. He said it to his partner in that offhand way people say important things when they don't want to make them important. New lock. His partner shrugged. Could have been replaced. Could have been updated. Could have been done during the chaotic weeks of the fires, but there was no record of it. They checked the log inside their system later. It wasn't there. That alone would have become a minor note, a to-do item, a figure out who did this. If the door hadn't opened, it did. The key worked. The door swung inward and the smell of the cab came out. Old wood, dust, metal warmed by sun, a faint chemical tang from the radio equipment. Normal. Then the ranger's eye caught something that didn't belong in a normal cab. A backpack, gray, daypack size, hanging from a hook near the window as if someone had set it there with care. Not tossed, not dropped, hung. It wasn't rotting on the floor. It wasn't chewed by animals. It looked dusty, but intact. It looked like it had been waiting. The ranger didn't touch it at first. He stared at it, trying to line up reality with memory, trying to decide if this could be a random left-behind pack from some careless hiker. But towers weren't supposed to be accessible. That was the whole point of the lock, and the pack wasn't cheap, disposable junk. It had gear attached, a waist strap buckled neatly, a hydration tube clipped in place. It looked like someone who liked order packed it. The ranger reached for it with the slow caution people adopt around surprises. The moment his glove touched the fabric, dust puffed off in a thin cloud. 4 months of dust, dry dust, settled dust. Not something that happens if someone was hiking up here last week. He unhooked it, set it on the small work table, unzipped it carefully like the bag might bite. Inside was the kind of inventory that makes your stomach drop because it feels personal and ordinary. A light jacket folded, a snack bag with crumbs, a battery bank, a headlamp, a small first aid kit, a map, and a wallet. The wallet had an ID, Owen Mercer. The ranger sat very still for a moment, not because he was afraid, because something in him clicked into place and then immediately slid out of place again. If Owen's bag was here, what did that mean? It meant he made it to the tower, or someone else brought it. Either way, this was not a simple lost on the trail story anymore. They documented the scene before they moved anything else. Photos, gloves, careful handling, a chain of custody that felt surreal for a lookout cab. They radioed down. The deputy was called. The search reopened, not with a swarm of volunteers, but with the cold intensity of a case that just changed category. The cab was searched top to bottom. The windows were checked for forced entry. None. The floorboards were checked for loose panels. Nothing obvious. The small storage bench was opened. It held old supplies and the smell of dry wood. The logbook was retrieved. The logbook was always the heart of the tower, a place where staff note weather conditions, smoke sightings, equipment status. Sometimes hikers scrawl their names if they sneak in. Sometimes bored people leave jokes. Sometimes someone writes something that sounds poetic because the view makes them believe they are. The last official entry was months old. Then there were gaps. And then, near the end of summer, there was a page torn out. Not ripped messily. Cleanly removed like someone wanted that page gone. The ranger crew hadn't noticed it at first because they hadn't been looking for it. Torn pages aren't dramatic unless you're already thinking like an investigator. Now it felt like a flare. Someone had been here after the last official entry. Someone had used the tower. Someone had removed a page, and Owen's bag was in the cab. The question everyone asked out loud was the simplest one. How did the bag get inside a locked tower? The question everyone asked silently was worse. How did Owen not get out? Investigators arrived. They treated the tower like a small crime scene, which is exactly what it was. A tiny room at the top of the world, suddenly full of evidence and absence. They checked the lock hardware. The screws holding the strike plate weren't original. The lock cylinder wasn't original. The new lock theory became a fact. It had been replaced. No one in the official chain admitted doing it. No work order, no record. Somebody had changed it without paperwork. Maybe during the fire chaos, maybe someone did it to fix a problem quickly and forgot to log it. Maybe someone did it because they wanted a key. That's the thing about locks. They don't just keep people out. They keep track of who can go in. A key is a list. A lock is a boundary. Someone moved that boundary. They looked for fingerprints, but the conditions were terrible for that. Dust, old surfaces, time. They collected what they could. They collected fibers. They bagged the backpack like it was a witness. Then they started looking outward again. If Owen's pack was inside the tower, then either he reached the tower and something happened after, or someone carried it up after he vanished. Both possibilities were bad in different ways. If he reached the tower, then the search in the first week missed the most important fact. It would mean he got up there and then disappeared from the last place anyone would expect him to vanish. If someone carried the pack up later, it meant someone was playing with the case. And that meant Owen's disappearance wasn't an accident. The trail below the tower was searched again, not with the same assumptions as before. Now they weren't looking for a lost hiker wandering. They were looking for evidence that someone had moved a body, for drag marks, for a fall point, for a hidden route off the ridge. They used different tools this time. Canine teams trained for remains, a drone sweep when weather allowed, careful excavation in a few suspicious spots where soil looked disturbed and then resettled. The forest did what forests do. It gave up small things and held back the big thing. They found a few items that could have been Owen's or could have been anyone's. A torn snack wrapper, a piece of strap, a footprint impression too old to trust, but nothing conclusive. The tower itself became the center. Investigators studied the cab layout, the windows, the bench, the corners. They looked for any route in or out that was not obvious, and they found one. Not a secret tunnel, not a trapdoor to an underground bunker. Something far more boring and therefore far more plausible. A maintenance hatch. Behind the storage bench, there was a panel that could be removed. It didn't lead to some hidden room. It led into the structure itself, the inner cavity between the cab walls and the outer siding. A space meant for wiring, for repairs, for insulating. A space big enough for a person to squeeze into. It was dusty, it was cramped, it smelled like old plywood and trapped air, and it had scuff marks, fresh enough to be noticeable. Not fresh like today, but fresh like this season. It looked like someone had been inside that space. It also explained something else. If someone didn't want to be seen inside the cab, they could hide in the wall cavity. They could wait. They could watch through tiny gaps. They could listen to someone moving around the room and know exactly where they were. A lookout cab is not large. If you are inside it with someone else, you feel it. You hear them breathe. You hear the shift of boots. You sense every movement, unless they are not inside it the way you think. unless they are inside the walls. That thought made even experienced investigators uncomfortable because it made the tower feel less like a building and more like a trap. Still, the hatch didn't solve everything. It raised new questions. Who would do that? Why? How long? Ash Peak had a history of unauthorized use. People broke in, teenagers, drifters, the occasional obsessive tower hunter who treated lookouts like trophies. There were reports from years ago of someone living in the area, a man who moved between old cabins and outbuildings, someone who knew the ridges, someone who could disappear into trees and come out in a different valley. No confirmed identity, just a local rumor that hardened over time. Then there was the fire season itself. During bad weeks, volunteers sometimes staffed stations. Temporary staff came and went. Paperwork slipped. Keys changed hands. People did favors. People cut corners because the smoke didn't care about procedure. It was possible Owen's case had been brushed by that chaos like a sleeve brushing ash. His phone had been tracked during the first week. It last pinged a tower in the valley for a brief moment mid-morning, then went dead. That had been interpreted as battery loss or being powered off. Now it looked more deliberate. The battery bank in his pack was still in the pack, charged. Owen had power. He chose not to use it, or someone chose for him. They looked at the pack contents more carefully. Everything was neat, almost too neat. The jacket was folded, the snack bag was closed, the headlamp was placed, not thrown. The wallet was inside, not lost in a pocket. It looked like the pack had been repacked, not by someone panicking, by someone organizing. That detail bothered the people who knew Owen. He didn't pack neatly on the fly. He packed neatly at home. On trail, things got messy, they always do. People shove, people cram, people zip and go. This pack looked like a display, like someone wanted it to communicate something. Then came the most chilling detail, the kind that feels small until it doesn't. The keys, a cluster of old keys on a thin cord was in the pack. Not the keys to his car, those were missing, these were different. Old, worn, not modern. The kind you might find in a junk drawer. The kind that belonged to a lock you haven't seen in years. No label, no tag, just metal. And on the cord was a faint smear of a reddish-brown stain. Not fresh, old. They tested it. The result came back inconclusive at first because time and contamination make everything difficult, but there were traces consistent with dried blood, not enough to build a case by itself, enough to make people stop pretending this was a simple disappearance. The tower was closed immediately, not just locked, closed with official seals, new lock, new records, a chain of keys that would be documented properly. That did not stop rumors. The public heard one thing. Owen's backpack was found inside the tower after months. Everything else was either withheld or guessed. And people guess loudest when they're scared. Some locals decided Owen must have been killed inside the cab. They pictured violence where there was no proof. They turned a cold place into a horror story because horror stories make the world feel explainable. Others decided Owen must have been alive for a while, that he hid, that he got trapped, that he signaled and nobody saw. That theory didn't fit the tower. A person trapped in a lookout cab can be seen. The windows are the whole point. A flashlight at night is a beacon. A shout carries in thin air. Unless the person isn't in the cab anymore, unless they went into the walls, unless someone put them there. Investigators tracked everyone with access, maintenance records, ranger schedules, volunteer lists, contractor invoices. They built a timeline of keys and lock changes. The missing page in the logbook became the sharpest thorn. Somewhere in someone's hands, there was a ripped-out page that might say exactly what happened. It might contain a notation, a name, a time, a smoke sighting that wasn't smoke, or it might just be a blank page that someone tore out for no reason. But people don't climb to a lookout to tear out a page for no reason. They interviewed hikers who had been on the trail that day. Most remembered nothing, because most days are forgettable. A couple remembered a man they saw on the climb. Quiet, alone, gray backpack, fit. One remembered a second person near the upper switchbacks, a figure standing off the trail, not moving much. That memory was fuzzy. The kind you don't trust until you have a reason to. Now they had a reason. They interviewed locals who lived in the nearest small town. Someone remembered seeing Owen's SUV in the lot, and another older truck parked nearby but couldn't swear the day. Weekends blur together. Someone remembered a man buying supplies at a gas station that morning, smelling like smoke, hands dirty, eyes restless. That detail became a lead, and then became nothing. Lots of people look like that in fire season. They checked old break-in reports at the tower. There were a few, the kind that get filed and forgotten. Broken padlocks, graffiti, a smashed radio handset years ago. Nothing recent enough to match the lock replacement. Then something surfaced that shifted the investigation again. A week after the backpack was found, a ranger went through a storage shed inventory down in the district station. It was the kind of dull task that makes you feel like your brain is drying out. Old parts, old locks, old tags, boxes labeled in faded marker. In one of the boxes, beneath miscellaneous hardware, was an older lock cylinder and a small envelope. Inside the envelope was a key, not labeled, not documented, and the lock cylinder in the box matched the old door hardware of Ash Peak Tower. Someone, at some point, had removed the old lock and brought it back to the station without logging it. That meant someone in the official orbit had touched the lock change, maybe innocently, maybe not. The investigation widened inward, which is always uncomfortable because the easiest monsters are strangers in the woods. The hardest monsters are the ones with badges and keys and explanations. They pulled the ranger schedules from that summer. They looked for who had been assigned to Ash Peak, who had been near it during the fire surge, who had access to hardware, who had the authority to change a lock without paperwork. Names came up. Then names cleared, then names came up again. It wasn't a clean path. The district was short-staffed. People covered for each other. People did emergency maintenance to prevent bigger issues. Paperwork lagged behind reality by weeks. Still, the key in that envelope didn't feel like an accident. It felt like someone wanted a spare. And spare keys always mean one thing. Someone wanted access without being noticed. 4 months is a long time for a missing person case to sit in the back of a ranger station, like a bruise that doesn't heal. People kept picturing Owen out there somewhere in the brush, and they kept picturing the tower watching over it all, silent. Then the backpack showed up in the most visible place possible. It felt like a message. A week later, another message arrived. Not a letter, not a confession, a tiny physical thing. A single car key, Owen's car key. It was found on the trail, not far from the tower stairs, tucked beneath a flat stone, like someone had placed it there deliberately. It wasn't buried, it wasn't lost in leaf litter. It was concealed just enough to not be noticed casually, but easy enough to find if you were looking. That shifted the pattern from maybe to someone is doing this. Someone had the key, Someone held it for months. Someone returned it when the pack was discovered. Why? To taunt, to confuse, to redirect, or to hint. Because the key location wasn't random. It was near the tower, near the stairs, near the place where Owen's last known direction pointed. It suggested Owen was here, not miles away, not in another valley. Here. The search focused on the tower structure itself. They brought in a structural specialist. They checked the under-platform supports. They checked the interior cavities. They checked any place a human body could be hidden. They found more scuff marks in the wall cavity behind the bench. They found a strand of fabric caught on a nail inside that cavity. Dark navy, the same color as Owen's windbreaker. They found a small smear on an inner beam. Old, dry. They tested it. Human blood. Not enough to scream, enough to confirm. Owen had been inside the tower cab, or at least inside its structure. Now the question became narrow and brutal. What happened between entering and vanishing? They reconstructed the day with what they had. Owen leaves early. He hikes up. He reaches the tower mid to late morning. Something occurs. His phone stops. His car stays. His body disappears. His backpack is later arranged and hung inside the cab. It implied time. It implied control. It implied an offender who could move within that tower without leaving obvious chaos. And that pointed back to the same thing again, a key. Either someone had a key that day, or someone forced entry and later replaced the lock to hide the evidence. Replacing a lock is not what random vandals do. It is what someone does when they want the door to look normal again. The investigation became quieter in public and louder in private. Because now, they weren't just searching woods, they were searching people. They looked at a former seasonal worker who had been fired 2 years earlier for breaking into equipment sheds. He knew the towers. He knew the locks. He had a history of taking things, hoarding things, keeping trophies. They interviewed him. He denied everything. His alibi was thin, but not non-existent. He lived far enough away that the drive would have been notable. Not impossible. Not easy. They looked at a local man who had been arrested for trespassing near a different lookout. He had mental health issues. He talked about towers as if they were living creatures. He also had no car and no steady way to reach Ash Peak. They looked at a contractor who had worked on the tower years back. He still had old keys in a drawer, he said. He had forgotten they existed. He offered them up without being asked, which is either innocence or performance. They looked at the ranger who had checked the lock in the first week, because that was the worst possibility. The idea that the backpack had been inside the cab all along, that Owen had made it there, that something happened, that the search stood under the tower and never realized the answer was above them. That possibility made people angry. It made them sick. It made them defensive. So they checked it. They compared the lock photos from the first week to the lock photos at maintenance day. Grainy phone images, angles, screw placement, rust pattern. The first week lock looked older. The maintenance day lock looked newer. That was real. So the bag was not there during the first week, or at least not accessible the way it became later, which meant the bag was placed later, which meant someone came back. And that meant someone knew the case was still open, still raw, still living in people's heads. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. The case didn't break wide open with one dramatic clue. It broke slowly like ice cracking. A small report from a neighboring district mentioned a truck seen parked near a closed trailhead on the day Owen disappeared. The plate wasn't recorded. but the make and model matched a truck owned by someone in the broader Ranger volunteer network. A volunteer, not a ranger. Someone with access sometimes. Someone with enough legitimacy to not attract attention. They narrowed the list. They found a man who had been present during fire surge days helping move supplies. He had been given keys to equipment sheds temporarily. He had a reputation for being eager, overly helpful, always where he wasn't needed. He also had a fascination with towers, not in a romantic way, in a possessive way. He had posted photos of himself at lookouts on social media. He talked about them like they were his. He framed the solitude as a kind of superiority. He loved the idea of being above everyone. Investigators pulled his phone records, they pulled his location history, they pulled what they could legally and carefully. His location data showed a gap that day, a gap near Ash Peak, not proof, but a gap is a shadow. They searched his property with a warrant. They found old locks, old keys, a ring of unmarked keys that looked like junk until you realize junk keys are how people keep secrets. They found a notebook, not a diary confession, a list, tower names, dates, small notes. One of the notes read, Ash Peak, door changed. Another read, cab page removed. And that was the moment the case stopped being a wilderness mystery and became what it probably had been all along. A human problem. The man denied everything. He claimed that he was a collector, a tower enthusiast. He claimed he changed locks as a favor. He claimed he removed pages because hikers wrote garbage and he wanted to preserve the tower. It sounded ridiculous. It also sounded like something someone would say if they believed they were the tower's guardian. Investigators didn't have Owen's body. Without a body, cases get harder. Juries want certainty, even when certainty is a luxury. But they had blood in the tower cavity. They had a missing log page. They had evidence of unauthorized lock changes. They had Owen's belongings placed like a display. They had a list that suggested obsession and access. They pressed, they pulled timelines, they found inconsistencies, they found moments where the man's story changed in small ways, the way a lie does when it runs out of oxygen. Still, no body. And then, in early spring, the snowmelt helped. Not in a poetic way, in a dirty, practical way. A seasonal creek below the ridge, a place that was dry in late summer, began to run. The water cut into soil. It exposed what had been hidden under a shallow layer of leaves and dirt. A hiker walking lower on the loop noticed something that didn't belong. A strip of dark fabric snagged on a root. Not like litter, like clothing. He reported it. Rangers went out. They found more. A torn piece of windbreaker, then another. Then a shape in the debris that made people go quiet. Owen's remains were found in a narrow ravine, not far from a faint, unofficial path that branched from the main route near the upper switchbacks. A place you could reach if you knew the area. A place you might use if you didn't want to be seen. It wasn't a neat discovery. It never is. Time had done what time does. Animals had done what animals do. The forest had been working, but the location mattered. It was close. Closer than people wanted. Close enough to suggest Owen never truly vanished into the wilderness. He was taken off the trail, hidden, left. The medical report couldn't give a clean narrative. It could give likely causes. It could give trauma indicators. It could not recreate the exact moment. Not after months, but investigators now had what the case needed. A body, a place, a story that could be anchored. The man with the list was arrested. The tower was sealed again, not just locked, officially decommissioned for a season, audited, Keys accounted for, paperwork tightened, and that is the strange part. After Owen was found, people still talked about the backpack more than the ravine, because the backpack was an act. The ravine was concealment. The backpack was theater. Someone climbed to that lookout after the search quieted down. Someone entered a locked cab. Someone hung a backpack from a hook where a ranger would see it on the first glance. Someone made sure the bag looked deliberate. Someone let the case breathe for 4 months, then squeezed it again. It wasn't done to help. It wasn't done to close the story. It was done to control it. That is what obsessed people do. They don't just take. They curate. They decide what you are allowed to know and when you are allowed to know it. They turn a public structure into a stage and then sit somewhere unseen, watching the reaction like it proves something about them. That was the ugliest truth the case left behind. Not that a man vanished near a lookout. Not even that he died. That someone treated the watching tower as a tool for their own power. Owen's sister went up once more after the arrest, after the recovery, after the paperwork, after the news coverage faded into the next thing. The tower was closed. She did not go inside. She stood below it and looked at the windows that had once seemed comforting. She looked at the stairs that had once seemed like a challenge, a simple climb. Now they looked like a ladder into someone else's mind. She didn't stay long. There's a point in these stories where people want a final sentence that makes it feel complete. A lesson, a warning, a clean ending. This story does have a warning. It just isn't the one people expect. The forest is dangerous, that is true, but the forest is also honest. If you slip, you fall. If you get lost, you wander. If you can't find water, your body tells the truth. Fast. People are different. A person can plan. A person can return. A person can stage. A fire lookout is built to watch for smoke. It cannot watch for intent. And on the day Owen Mercer hiked toward Ash Peak, the sky was clear, the wind was light, the trail was busy enough to feel safe. The danger was not weather, it wasn't fire, it wasn't the ridge. The danger was that someone else loved that tower in the wrong way and had a key.